Jake led his friends down the hallway, keeping low behind overturned desks and broken lockers. The sounds of footsteps and shouting followed them closely. They reached the gymnasium, which provided more space to plan their next move. The students were catching their breath but remained alert. Jake knew the invaders would not wait. They needed to strike first. Emily looked around and found a volleyball net. She suggested they use it as a trap. Jake nodded. Together, they tied it across the doorway and added chairs and bags to hold it in place. Ryan and Claire prepared more objects to throw if the soldiers tried to enter. The students felt a surge of confidence. They were no longer just defending, they were fighting back. The first group of soldiers approached the gym doors. Jake signaled, and the volleyball net swung down, knocking one soldier off balance. Ryan threw a basketball, hitting another in the leg. Claire shouted, throwing papers and pens at the soldiers. Emily rolled a chair into one of the attackers. The soldiers stumbled and cursed, not expecting resistance from children. The students moved quickly. Jake led them to a storage room filled with cleaning supplies and sports equipment. They found mops, brooms, and heavy balls. Jake handed each friend a weapon. They were still young, but with strategy and courage, they were dangerous. Jake whispered a plan. We wait for them here, and then we strike together. The soldiers entered the storage room. Jake signaled, and Emily swung a mop, knocking a soldier back. Ryan tossed a heavy ball, hitting another in the chest. Claire tripped one with a broom. Jake jumped from the side, pushing another soldier into a pile of boxes. The students worked as a team, coordinated and fearless. The soldiers were strong, but unprepared for this kind of fight. The students realized they could not stay in one place too long. Jake suggested moving toward the library. It had multiple exits and more materials to use for traps. The friends agreed and moved quickly, dodging bullets and debris. Along the way, they guided other students who were scared, teaching them to stay low and use objects to defend themselves. In the library, Jake found more opportunities. Shelves could be toppled to block doors, books could be thrown or used as shields. He instructed everyone to set traps in the main hallways leading to the library. Emily and Ryan worked together to stack shelves and block entrances. Claire and other students prepared books and heavy objects as weapons. The next group of soldiers arrived. Jake and his friends waited silently. As the soldiers stepped into the hallway, the shelves fell, blocking their path. Students threw books and used sticks to strike at the intruders. The soldiers tried to push forward, but every step was met with resistance. Jake moved through the chaos, directing attacks and guiding students. He was calm and focused, a natural leader in the middle of battle. Soldiers began to realize the students were not weak. Each one was using intelligence and courage to fight back. Jake signaled for a final push. Students from nearby classrooms joined in, throwing objects and shouting, creating confusion. The soldiers were forced to retreat, regrouping outside the library. The students had won this skirmish, but knew more would come. Jake gathered his friends and the other students. They were tired but determined. He spoke quietly. We slowed them down, but the battle is not over. We need to hold this building and protect everyone. Emily suggested setting more traps and finding a secure room to plan their next move. Ryan and Claire agreed. Together, they reinforced the library, creating barricades and planning escape routes. They trained the other students quickly, showing them how to fight and defend. The school had changed. It was no longer just a place to learn. It was a battlefield, and the students had become soldiers. Jake looked around at his friends. They were scared, but they were strong, and they would fight for their school and their city. The school was quiet. Sunlight fell through the large windows into a room filled with desks and chairs. Jake sat near the back, doodling on a notebook, while Emily whispered a joke to Ryan and Claire. The day had started normal, with teachers and students following a regular schedule. The sound of laughter filled the classroom for a moment. Then the world changed. Suddenly, a loud explosion shook the walls. Windows shattered, sending shards of glass across the floor. Screams filled the air. The ceiling trembled as more explosions echoed from the streets outside. Students froze, unsure if it was real. Jake felt a rush of fear but quickly shook it off. He had to act fast. Jake looked out the broken windows. Human soldiers wearing dark armor were moving through the streets. They had weapons that shone under the sun. They were not friendly. Their goal was clear. They came to take control. Turned to Emily, Ryan, and Claire. Their eyes were wide, but Jake's voice was calm. We have to move. We cannot wait. He grabbed a heavy book from his desk and waved the others to follow him. The four of them ran to the far side of the classroom. Desks were overturned as they used them for cover. The soldiers entered the school. They moved quickly, checking every corner, yelling for surrender. Students hid under desks and behind walls. Jake could hear their footsteps and the sound of weapons clicking. He knew that if they waited, they would be captured or worse. He whispered a plan to his friends. We can use this room to slow them down. We can make them regret coming here. Emily nodded, understanding immediately. She ran to the supply cabinet, pulling out scissors, rulers, and other hard objects. Ryan grabbed chairs and heavy textbooks. Claire moved to the doorway, peeking to see the soldiers' movements. Jake set a trap. He stacked chairs to block one door and pushed a table so it leaned against the wall. He motioned for Emily to follow him. Together they placed scissors in spots where the soldiers might step. Every small object became a weapon in their hands. They were students, but they would fight like soldiers. The first group of soldiers entered the classroom. Jake waited until they were near the center. He kicked a chair, sending it toward a soldier. The soldier stumbled and fell, hitting his shoulder. Ryan pushed a desk into another soldier, and Emily swung a ruler, hitting one on the leg. Claire shouted, distracting them. The room was chaos, but the students had control. The soldiers recovered quickly. They were trained for this, but they did not expect resistance from children. Jake realized their strength was in numbers, not strategy. He whispered to his friends, "Follow my lead. We'll slow them down. Every second counts." They moved through the classroom, using walls for cover, throwing objects, and blocking doors. The soldiers tried to push forward, but the students kept finding ways to stop them. Jake led them to the science lab, where heavier equipment could be used. He grabbed a small fire extinguisher and tossed it at the soldiers, forcing them to retreat a few steps. Emily set up more traps while Ryan and Claire kept watch. Jake noticed a side door that led to the hallway. If they could reach it, they could gain more control of the building. He motioned, and the friends moved quickly, keeping low and silent. Each step was dangerous, but their courage pushed them forward. The sounds of fighting echoed through the halls. Other students were beginning to follow Jake's lead, picking up objects and defending themselves. The school was no longer just a building. It was a battlefield, and the students were soldiers. Jake's mind raced with plans. He knew they needed to stay alive and gain an advantage over the invaders. They reached the hallway. Jake paused, looking at the chaos around him. The students were scared but determined. He smiled slightly and said, "This is our school. We will not let them take it." The friends nodded, ready to face whatever came next. The battle had only begun, and Jake was ready to lead them through it. Jake knew they could not hold the school alone. The invaders were strong and organized. He gathered his friends and the students who had joined them in the library. "We need more fighters," he said. "If we work together, we can defend the school and protect everyone." Emily suggested sending a signal to other classrooms to gather students and teachers. Ryan found a phone and called the local militia who were hiding nearby. Claire helped direct students to safe positions, making sure they knew where to fight and where to hide. The library became the command center, with Jake and his friends coordinating every move. Soon, more students and a few teachers arrived. Ms. Carter, a tall woman with a calm voice, took charge of training the younger students. She showed them how to use objects as weapons and how to move quietly through the halls. Jake assigned roles to each student. Some would fight in the hallways, some would set traps, and others would keep watch for invader movements. The students worked quickly. They barricaded doors, stacked chairs, and pushed bookshelves into positions that blocked the invaders. They made tripwires using string and supplies from the art room. The school became a maze of defenses, each corner a potential trap. Jake moved among them, giving instructions and encouraging the fighters. Their fear turned into determination. Outside the library, the invaders were planning their next attack. Jake studied their movements through a broken window. He noticed they focused on speed and force, but they did not plan for obstacles. He whispered to Emily and Ryan, "We can use this. We need to make every hallway a trap." Emily nodded, understanding instantly. Ryan gathered supplies while Claire directed students to set the traps. The next wave of soldiers entered the school. They were met with barricades and obstacles. Students threw objects from behind cover. A chair fell on one soldier, books hit another, and a mop knocked one off balance. The soldiers were frustrated. They were trained fighters, but the students used strategy to slow them down. Jake led a small group to flank the invaders through a side corridor. They moved quietly, surprising the soldiers from behind. Ms. Carter guided the younger students to help set more traps while keeping them safe. Every student had a role, and every role was important. The school was no longer just a building, it was a battlefield, and the students were learning to fight like soldiers. One of the soldiers spotted Jake and shouted. Jake did not panic. He dodged and led his group to another part of the school, drawing the soldiers into a trap set by Emily and Ryan. The soldiers stumbled into tripwires, fell over chairs, and were hit by objects thrown from above. The students cheered quietly. They were winning small battles, and each victory gave them more courage. The students began to understand their power. They were young, but they were smart, fast, and brave. Jake reminded them to stay focused. The invaders were strong, but they could be defeated if they used their minds as well as their strength. Claire helped set up lookouts, watching every hallway and stairwell. Any sign of movement was reported immediately. Hours passed. The students held their positions and defended the school. The invaders were confused and frustrated, expected easy victories, but they found resistance at every turn. Jake's strategy was working. He had taken ordinary students and made them defenders. The school was no longer a classroom, it was a fortress, and Jake had become a leader that everyone trusted and followed. As the day ended, the students gathered briefly to rest. They were tired and sore, but they were ready. Jake looked around at Emily, Ryan, Claire, Ms. Carter, and the other students. We have done well, he said. Tomorrow will be harder, but together we can hold this school. The students nodded, knowing that the battle had just begun and that they would fight with everything they had. The next morning, the school was tense. The students were alert, watching every movement outside the windows. Jake gathered his friends and the other fighters in the library. Today, he said, we face the leader. The human queen has arrived. We must be smart and strong. Emily looked concerned but nodded. Ryan tightened his grip on a baseball bat. Claire checked the tripwires and barricades. Ms. Carter walked among them, offering guidance and reassurance. The students had grown stronger and braver, but facing the queen was different. She was a trained soldier and leader, known for her skill and cunning. Through the broken windows, Jake saw her and her elite soldiers moving into the school. She carried a long staff and wore armor that gleamed under the sun. Her troops were disciplined and ready to fight. The students held their positions, knowing this battle would be critical. Jake quickly devised a plan. We will lure her into the upper hallways, he whispered to Emily and Ryan. We make her think the upper floors are weak. Emily prepared books and objects as decoys. Ryan set traps in the stairs and landings. Claire positioned students to block escape routes. The queen and her soldiers advanced. They moved cautiously, scanning for threats. Jake signaled his friends, and the students stayed hidden, waiting for the right moment. The queen approached the first trap. A shelf fell in front of her, blocking the path. A chair swung down, hitting one of her soldiers. Papers and small objects flew from above, forcing them to slow down. Jake's group moved silently along the sides, observing the queen's reactions. She was strong and smart, but she relied on intimidation. Jake saw an opening, he whispered. Now, students launched their attack, striking from above and the sides. The queen was surprised, but quickly recovered, fighting back with her staff and commanding her soldiers. Emily threw a heavy book, forcing one soldier back. Ryan swung a mop, hitting another. Claire distracted them with shouts and quick movements. The students used every object they could find. They worked as a team, coordinated and fearless. The queen realized the students were more than she expected. The battle moved up the stairs. Jake led a small group through a side corridor to flank the queen. They threw objects and used obstacles to slow her forces. Ms. Carter guided the younger students to safety while helping set more traps. The queen and her soldiers found themselves surrounded on multiple sides. The queen struck back, her staff moving fast and hard. She was powerful, but Jake stayed calm. He directed students to target her soldiers while avoiding direct attacks from her. The plan worked. Her troops were injured and confused, and the students gained control of the hallways. Jake noticed a ventilation shaft above the stairs. He signaled Emily and Ryan. They climbed and prepared to drop objects from above. The Queen's attention was on the main group below. At Jake's signal, heavy objects fell from the vent, striking the soldiers and forcing them to retreat further. The Queen grew frustrated. She realized she underestimated the students. She tried to regroup, but the traps and constant attacks kept her off balance. Jake's plan was working perfectly. Students had turned the upper floors into a deadly maze. After several minutes of fierce fighting, the Queen and her remaining soldiers were trapped in a corner. Jake's friends surrounded them, ready to force a surrender. The students had used intelligence, strategy, and courage to gain the upper hand. The Queen's face showed respect for their skill. She knew the students were a force to be reckoned with. Jake looked at his friends and said quietly, "We did it." He held the upper floors. "The battle is not over, but we proved that humans, even young ones, can fight and win." The students nodded, tired but proud. The school was still a battlefield, but for the first time they had taken control, and they were ready for whatever came next. Jake and his friends watched the Queen's forces from the upper hallways. They were regrouping, trying to plan their next move. Jake whispered, "We have to make this count. We lure them into the corridor with the traps." Emily nodded and checked the tripwires while Ryan and Claire moved objects to create more obstacles. The students were ready. The Queen's soldiers moved carefully down the hallway. Jake signaled, and the first trap was triggered. Shelf fell, blocking the front soldier. Books and objects were thrown from above, hitting others in the group. The invaders stumbled and cursed. The students moved quickly, striking and retreating with precision. Each attack was coordinated. They were no longer scared children. They were fighters. Emily swung a chair, knocking one soldier to the side. Ryan rolled a heavy ball, hitting another in the chest. Claire tripped one with a broom and pushed him into a wall. Jake led a small team along the sides to flank the soldiers. The corridor was chaotic, but the students used it to their advantage. The Queen realized she was in danger. Her troops were trapped and disoriented. Jake saw an opening and whispered to his friends, "We push forward now." They moved together, forcing the Queen's forces further into the traps. Bookshelves fell behind them, blocking retreat. Tripwires and obstacles slowed the soldiers, making every step dangerous. The students attacked with courage, never hesitating. The Queen tried to regain control. She struck with her staff, keeping Jake and his friends at bay. But the traps were too effective. Soldiers could not support her. Jake directed the students to target her troops while avoiding her attacks. The Queen was strong and skilled, but she could not fight them all at once. Emily and Ryan moved to the ventilation shafts, preparing to drop more objects. Jake signaled, and heavy objects fell from above, hitting the remaining soldiers and forcing them to stumble. The students pressed the attack from the sides and behind. The Queen's forces were now trapped in a corridor filled with obstacles and attackers. They could not escape or fight effectively. Jake's friends pressed forward, striking with precision and teamwork. The soldiers fell one by one. The Queen fought fiercely, but the constant attacks and traps kept her from moving freely. Jake watched her carefully. He knew this was their chance to gain control. Whispered, "We surround them." Emily and Ryan blocked one end, while Claire and other students blocked the other. The Queen realized she was cornered. Her face showed respect for the students' skill and courage. She ordered a halt, and her troops stopped fighting. Jake stepped forward with his friends, holding their weapons ready. The corridor was full of students and obstacles. The Queen could not escape. Her forces were defeated. Students cheered quietly. It forced the Queen and her soldiers into a trap and gained control of the key corridors. Jake looked at his friends and said, "We did it. The traps worked, and we turned the tide." Emily smiled, Ryan nodded, and Claire breathed heavily, but felt proud. Ms. Carter joined them, praising their courage and intelligence. The battle in the upper hallways was over. The students had proven they could fight and win against stronger and more experienced enemies. Jake reminded them to stay alert, as the Queen might try another attack, but the students were ready. They had learned strategy, teamwork, and courage. The school was still a battlefield, but now the students controlled the corridors, and the invaders had learned not to underestimate them. As they rested briefly, Jake looked around at his friends and the other students. "We are stronger than we thought," he said. "Together, we can protect the school." The students nodded, tired but determined. The upper hallways were theirs, and they were ready to face whatever came next. They knew that with courage and strategy, humans could fight and win against any force. The next wave of the Queen's forces moved through the school with more caution. Jake watched from a corner of the upper hallway. He knew they would not give up easily. He gathered his friends and the other students. "We hold them here," he said. "Every hallway and room is a trap. They stay sharp." Emily checked the tripwires and reinforced barricades. Ryan and Claire moved heavy objects into strategic positions. Ms. Carter helped the younger students, making sure they knew where to hide and when to strike. Jake made a quick plan. It would split into small groups, attacking from multiple directions. The Queen's soldiers would be confused and forced into their traps. The invaders entered the main corridor. Immediately, they stumbled into obstacles. Shelves and chairs blocked the path. Tripwires made them fall, and students attacked from above and the sides. Jake and his friends moved silently, striking at weak points and retreating before being seen. The soldiers were strong but unprepared for this level of strategy. Emily swung a heavy broom, knocking a soldier to the side. Ryan rolled a ball into another, sending him crashing into a barricade. Claire pushed a chair, causing a small pile of debris to collapse on one of the attackers. Jake led a team through a side corridor to flank the remaining soldiers. The school was alive with fighting, but the students remained focused and coordinated. The Queen appeared, her staff ready, struck at Jake and his friends, forcing them to dodge quickly. She moved with skill and precision, but she could not fight all directions at once. Jake signaled for the students to focus on her soldiers first. The traps and attacks weakened her forces, leaving her more vulnerable. From the ventilation shafts, Emily and Ryan dropped objects, hitting the soldiers and creating more confusion. The students attacked from above, below, and the sides. Every step of the invaders was met with resistance. The Queen tried to regroup, but Jake's team kept pressing forward. They were fast, smart, and fearless. The battle reached the main stairwell. Jake led a group to push the remaining soldiers into the traps set below. Shelves toppled, objects flew from above, and students struck from hidden positions. The invaders were trapped, disoriented, and unable to move freely. The Queen realized she had underestimated the students again. Her forces were collapsing. Jake approached the Queen carefully, watching her movements. He directed his friends to keep the soldiers busy while he confronted her. She swung her staff, but Jake dodged and led her into a corner, surrounded by barricades and students. She fought fiercely, but she was trapped and could not escape. The remaining soldiers saw their leader cornered and began to surrender. Jake motioned for the students to hold position and not attack further. The Queen looked at the students with respect. She realized that intelligence, courage, and teamwork had defeated her forces. She lowered her staff, signaling the end of the battle in the stairwell. The students cheered quietly. They were tired, sore, and covered in dust, but they had won. Jake gathered his friends and the other fighters. "We did it," he said. "The school is ours. We showed that humans, even young ones, can fight and win against stronger enemies." Emily smiled. Ryan nodded, and Claire breathed heavily, but felt proud. Miss Carter congratulated them, praising their bravery and strategy. The school was still a battlefield, but the students had proven they could defend it. Jake looked around at his friends and the other students. "We fought together. We used our minds and we used our courage," he said. "We are ready for whatever comes next." The students nodded, knowing they had become true defenders of their school and city, ready to face any challenge with intelligence and bravery. The battle was over. The school was quiet, except for the occasional creak of broken furniture and the soft murmur of students checking on each other. Jake walked through the halls, his friends close behind. They were tired and sore, but their faces showed pride and relief. They had won. Emily, Ryan, and Claire helped students move debris and set up safe areas. Ms. Carter guided younger students, making sure everyone was accounted for. Jake checked the barricades and traps one last time. The school was secure. The Queen and her remaining soldiers had surrendered or retreated. Humans had defended their ground and proven their courage. The The students gathered in the library, the command center of their defense. Jake spoke quietly, but firmly. We held the school and protected each other. We showed that even ordinary humans can fight and win when we work together. Emily nodded, Ryan smiled, and Claire clapped softly. The students understood the truth in his words. Courage and strategy mattered more than strength alone. Jake walked to the windows, looking at the streets. The city was in chaos, but the people who had survived were inspired. News of the students' victory would spread. They had turned a simple school into a fortress and a battlefield into a victory for humans. Jake felt a sense of responsibility. This was just the beginning. Humans had shown they could fight and survive. He gathered his friends and the students for a final plan. We help others, he said. We rebuild, we protect, and we prepare. Emily and Ryan took charge of checking classrooms for anyone who was hurt. Claire coordinated supplies and safe spots. Miss Carter and the older students organized groups to guard the entrances. Everyone had a role. Everyone was part of the defense. The students moved through the halls, helping each other and setting up safe spaces. Broken windows were covered, and debris was cleared where possible. Jake saw the determination in their faces. They were no longer just children or defenders. They had learned courage, strategy, and teamwork. They turned fear into strength. As night fell, the students gathered in the gymnasium, resting together. Jake looked at his friends and said, "We did what no one expected. We fought, we won, and we survived." The students nodded. They had faced real danger and had come out stronger. The school was still a battlefield, but now it was theirs to protect. Jake thought of the future. Other challenges might come, but he knew humans could face them. With courage, intelligence, and unity, they could overcome any threat. The students had learned that strength was not just in weapons or armor, but in the mind, in the heart, and in the willingness to act. The school was quiet, the battle over, but the victory was more than just holding the building. It was proof that humans could rise against any force, no matter how strong. Jake and his friends looked at each other, tired but proud. They had turned a classroom into a battlefield and had taken command. And in doing so, they had shown the power of humans to fight, survive, and protect what mattered most.